Area of curricular development that we've done a lot of research on are high impact practices. And just raise your hand if you've heard of high impact practices. You're familiar? Okay. And can you raise your hand if you're a social scientist? I think I'm the only one. Okay, there are a handful. All right, thank you. So we may need to assist. I don't speak some of the languages that you speak, so I'm going to translate a few things for you. And this is something, when I was at Indiana University, I had a couple of short-term study abroad programs, and I usually had a large number of science students, and they would say, it's going to take us a while to get used to you and the way you do things. This is not how scientists do things. But overall, we work together. We're able to come together. So when we talk about high impact practices, these are practices that are beneficial for all students, but we have data that shows they benefit new majority students even more. Now, what are new majority students? Have you heard that term before? Anyone just kind of nod or no? Okay, new majority students is a term that you know, it's just a repackaged term, if you will. As I said, AAC&U is a member-driven organization. And this is a term that has been developed by our membership. And new majority students simply refers to students of color, first-generation students, some recently arrived immigrants, students from a lower SES background, our returning students who are veterans, and older students, as was mentioned earlier. And so some like this phrase a bit more than underserved or underrepresented because they say that it casts a wider net and it includes more of the students that we need to include. And it's really an issue about talent, and I'll get to that in just a minute. So again, these practices of high impact practices, there are about 10 that we have found evidence for success, as I said, for new majority students, but for all students. But the thing is, as I said before, they benefit all students. And global learning and research, particularly undergraduate research, are two elements of high impact practices that really, really benefit our students. One thing to think about is that it's not magical for a student to go abroad, even though we may think it is. It's not magical for a student to do a research project if it's not done well and if there's not preparation. And so you can see I've listed some of the quality dimensions, and again, these are things that the students already spoke to. One, that there's a significant investment in time and effort. So when you're working in a lab, you're not just going to the lab for 2 days. It's a significant project that has actually been developed, and the mentor has spoken with the student. Having significant interaction with faculty and peers related to the research and other substantive matters, that's critical. And this experience with diversity, which is also a major factor. And you heard the students talk about that. When they were in the lab, they were working students from Brazil, from India, from Israel, and those are very rich experiences. And the other point I think that's important when students are working abroad and they've got a mentor at home and a mentor in the local community, that they're getting some sort of frequent and timely and constructive feedback. That goes back to the point that was made about we're doing blogs or we're sending reflections in. We're actually thinking about what we're doing. We're not just going in the lab and leaving it there, and that's absolutely critical. The last one is related to real-world problems and real-world activities, which working in a lab absolutely affords students the opportunity to do. So one other thing at AAC&U that we've done is we have worked closely with a group called Hart and Associates, and they have done a number of employee surveys guided by questions that our membership has. And I've just pulled some of the data from the employer surveys. We've done 5. Most recently, we did one in 2015. And these were some of the elements that were related to the type of work that we're talking about this week. So you can see the top point, 91% of employers say that whatever the major, all students should have experience in solving problems with people whose views are different from their own. And that's absolutely critical. This is something, again, 91% of the employers said that. Below it, 73% of employers believe that college graduates' preparation for careers would improve if they were required to complete a significant applied learning project, which many of your students are doing when they go abroad for the research experience and they come back with a publication or some sort of project when they return. 80% of employers say they are more likely to hire a college graduate who has completed a collaborative research project, and you can't see that with the MAC transition. So again, speaking directly to undergraduate research. And lastly, 78% of employers strongly or somewhat agree that all students should gain intercultural skills and an understanding of societies and cultures outside the U.S. Now, these were employers all across the U.S., and I'm happy to send some of this employer data to you so you have a better idea of who they are, what size industries they were. But the fact is, no matter where they are going to work, whether they're going to work abroad or whether they're going to work in the U.S., these are skills that employers deem important. And as I said, it's critical for our graduates, and it can't just be for a few students. This is something we need to be doing for all of our students. So just a few quick suggestions, and again, these are things that the students already addressed, so I don't have too much to say, but when you're talking about preparing for authentic international research opportunities, pre-research preparation is critical, and we heard that from the students. I think Tyler, when he talked about the importance of learning some language, learning some culture, knowing about Islam if you're going to a country that's predominantly Muslim. I worked with students who also, we had a project in Indonesia. And we spent a lot of time talking about different types of Islam, you know, what type of Islam is practiced in Indonesia, how does it differ in Jakarta, in Yogyakarta, in Bali. So students were able to go in with a nuanced understanding, yet they went in not thinking they knew everything, but they had a baseline, and then they learned from their colleagues when they were there. So from students, from faculty, and it made a huge difference. Also, the professional preparation. If you're sending students into lab, what is the culture like in a German lab? How is that different than a lab here? And how do you make sure that they're aware before they go so they don't get to the airport, but this will happen time and time again, and say, I want to go home. I've had students who I thought, we did the best preparation, and they were like, okay, this is too much. This is overwhelming. I can't do it. No matter what you've done, they still sometimes get a bit overwhelmed. Another thing that's critical is to have clear pathways and scaffolding for students so they can see where they are going. So you can say, we think it's important your junior year that you have this experience. So if we can provide opportunities along the way that prepare students to say, okay, we're going to get experience in a lab here before you go to a lab internationally, so you can say, okay, I have some context. That's absolutely critical and helpful. Some institutions that are members of AAC&U have looked at what research skills they think are important, and they've developed a pathway. Others have said we're doing it year by year. It really depends on your institutional context and what works best for you. Lastly, the resource mentors at home and abroad. I think William said it best. You know, I had instead of a Dr. O, I had a Dr. Asenso when I was a student, and every year he was like, okay, where are you going this summer? What's your project for this summer? How long are you staying in Ghana this time? Are you staying the whole summer? Are you and it was that whole mentality that I had a mentor who always wanted to know, okay, what's your next step? When I graduated and I said, well, I want to teach for a while, he said, okay, but when are you going to grad school? I don't want you getting comfortable outside of higher ed. You've got to get back in. And he continually contacted me and said, okay, this is the year. When are you starting the application process? What schools are you going to? So it's absolutely critical to have that sort of mentor. And also having that mentor in your lab abroad. And that's one thing that a number of institutions have really tried to do, is making sure there's someone in the lab internationally that can look out for their students. And that is sometimes easier to do than others. So with us, as I said, our second big point at AAC&U is to really encourage inclusive excellence. And for us, inclusive excellence as a concept means providing opportunities for all students to have high quality experiences. And so when we talk about inclusive excellence, it really is an issue of talent. And we're hearing this from presidents of universities, we're hearing it from deans, we're hearing it from faculty, we're hearing it from employers. We're missing out on talent by not providing these types of opportunities to all students. And for us, it's critical that we find a way to make sure that the students who may be a little bit older, or the students who may be started differently, or students who may go to a school where people say, oh, students at that school are underprepared. We have to figure out a way to make sure that they are also included, because institutions, and these are highly selective institutions, open access, we're hearing the same song. We're missing out on talent. And when we have a model of inclusive excellence where we look at diversity, we look at inclusion and equity as part of our democratic culture, it makes a huge difference. Lastly, when we think about the integration of new majority students in programs like this, in international research, in global learning broadly, in undergraduate research, those kinds of things, one thing is first that students are aware. You know, as you said, you told that young man, there's a program and you're going to do it. So he had to be made aware. And so we've got to find ways to make sure that students are aware when they come in, or whenever they're aware that they know that these are opportunities. The second thing that's critical is that it's important to their education. It's not an add-on. That was one of the challenges that we faced, particularly in the area of global learning, is that, oh, global learning is for those students. No, global learning is part of everyone's educational experience. And once we see it as integrated, then you have some of the families that may say, you know, I really don't want I don't want my daughter or son going away for a semester or for 6 weeks. But when you say this is something all of the students are doing and we're expecting them to do it, then it shifts the narrative and students say, okay, so that means I have to figure out what summer I'm doing research, what summer I'm going abroad, and it completely changes the perspective when they think, okay, getting involved in research is the same as taking H105, my intro history class. And so that's a cultural shift that's happened on a number of campuses, and we're working with campuses to assist. Again, this concept of it being an institutional commitment for all students, not just for our honors college students, but this is something we want all of our students to participate in. And then belonging and seeing themselves. When students hear about these programs, do they see students like the 4 we saw today so they can say, oh yes, I can do this, I'm a part of it. But we have to make conscious efforts to make sure that students can see themselves and that they feel like they belong in these programs. So it's not, I guess I'll do this program, but it's one where, oh, I fit in. I know that I can be a part of this program, and I know that I will be welcome and I will be a strong contributor to the program. The other thing that's important is to have an institutional commitment to equitable access and to participation in the program. So it's not enough just to say, oh, we welcome all students, but not providing any kind of support for students that may have just learned about it. Whereas you said, okay, here's how you do it. You've got to do this application, and not just say, oh yeah, by 5 o'clock, look at this paperwork and figure it out. No, there's someone who can help some of the students figure out how to do it. And some may say, that's a lot of extra work. Yes, it is. But if we want to get that talent and we want to make sure that more students are taking advantage of these opportunities, we have to be committed to those kinds of things. And I think I will stop there because I am trying to be mindful of time and the 5 slides. I don't know if you have questions or.
For that introduction. Yes, Randy asked me yesterday to give a short presentation on what I do, which fits into this scene, but I was so inspired by the students that I'm sorry that there's only 2 of you left right now, because I was going to tell you my story briefly, a little more briefly than you did. I'm sort of what you see at the far end. So when I was 24 years old, I had been to college, but I was flopping around with no goals. And I can tell by looking around this room that most of these guys haven't been flopping, but I was. And when I was 24, I decided I got to do something. My life is passing away. I got to take some action. So I went to see the only college professor that I liked, which happened to be an ornithologist. And I said, well, you know what? I like bird watching. What do I got to do to be an ornithologist? And he said, well, it happens I'm hiring somebody. I need you to go to Borneo. And so this guy, out of nowhere, became my mentor. He put me on a plane. I'd never been overseas in my life, had to get a passport, the whole thing. And I went to Borneo, and you talk about culture shock. And in those days, when I wrote to my mother, I didn't Skype her, I didn't email her, I wrote her a letter. It took 2 weeks to get there, and it took 2 weeks to get back, and it went to poste restante, which is a thing where the mail arrives in the post office and you go through it. So it was quite a different experience, but believe me, I had everything, I experienced everything you've experienced. I really wanted to say this to the students, but exaggerated. So, but what that did to me was made my life. I've devoted my life to Borneo. And I never until this conference thought that I really cared about students in Borneo or in America particularly. I mostly cared about myself. But as you'll see, empirically, it's actually worked out for these students. So a little background. So Borneo, just in case you don't know, is in Southeast Asia. There's Thailand. We've heard a lot about Thailand to the northeast and Philippines to the north. To the Philippines to the northeast, Thailand to the northwest. Vietnam, everybody knows where that is. Borneo is actually divided into 3 countries. So there's Kalimantan, Indonesian Borneo is most of it in the south, Brunei, the little sultanate in the north, and then there's 2 Malaysian states, Sarawak and Sabah. And that's where I've spent a lot of my career. Those are former British colonies. Sabah is about the size of Ireland, just to give you some perspective, about 2.5 million people. Sarawak has about the same number of people. The reason I keep going back to Borneo is that I love the place. It has, perhaps next to Thailand, the best food in the world. It has the most spectacular forests. They were a lot better when I went there at the beginning than they are now. And I'm a natural history guy, so that was nice. It's very safe. There are no guns. There are shotguns, but that's it. It's extremely safe. And the most important thing is the people are wonderful. And although they're famous at one time for being headhunters, I can't even imagine how that could be, because it's not the case nowadays. These folks are divided into many tribes. I've showed a few of them here. This is from the poster I had out on the table. A few of them. There are dozens, and there are dozens of languages. And each group is extremely proud of its heritage and distinctive, and has unique characteristics that make them particularly interesting. And I've worked with a lot of these different people. At the beginning, years ago, they were guides, or they helped me in the forest, or they made sure I didn't kill myself in the forest. But now, as you'll see, they've become my students. There are lots of colleges and universities in Borneo, or lots for the place that's relatively undeveloped. These are the major federal universities. The one in the middle, UPM, is an agricultural college like this one. The others are more normal-looking universities. Extremely beautiful, well-developed places. So this is a picture I took 25 years ago, or 40 years ago, not 25 years ago, 40 years ago, the way Borneo used to be. It was incredible amounts of forest, which has now all been cut down. This is a place being prepared for plantation. It's now almost all plantation. 40 years ago, the people of Borneo, except those that lived in the forest, weren't that concerned about the state of the forest. Nowadays, the people of Borneo are extremely concerned about the forest. They're very proud of it. They're proud of the biodiversity. They make a lot of money off of ecotourism. It's something that's of interest. And you can't see my little thing up there, but it says, conservation the lure. So what's happened in Malaysia, as in most of Southeast Asia, India, China, and the surrounding country, is that everybody wants to be in STEM. Every student wants to be an engineer, a biomedical researcher. No one wants to get in the forest. The heritage is in deep trouble because the forest has been cut down and there doesn't seem to be much left. But I am able to use conservation as a lure to get those Bornean students back into the forest. And I get them in there studying the simple things about birds. So here are some plantations. So what's happened in Borneo is they cut all the forest down, except for a few little spots, made a huge amount of money, which went to very few people. Now there's no money to be made in the forest, so what they're doing is clearing it and putting up plantations which have economic benefit. And so what we do is we study, since there's no natural forest, or not very much natural forest, we study how the organisms in the forest do in these plantations. And so I take this sort of conservation concern of the students, the very few students who aren't interested in hardcore STEM, and I use it to get them into the forest. And then what I try to do is lure them away from that applied conservation biology into basic issues of ecology and evolution. In my case, I study birds, so why are there so many birds in tropical forests? Why? How do all these birds that look basically the same, like these guys, live in the same place? These kinds of questions that evolutionary biologists and ecologists concern themselves with. So I lure the students in and then give them some pretty hardcore evolution. And I do this whole process with the two-pronged approach. I'm a museum guy, so museum people go and they collect things and they put them in the museum. And that's the 19th century part of museum work. So and Americans kids love that. I have no problem getting American kids who want to go to Borneo. They love that. They want to get in the forest and collect things and study them. It's a little harder with the Bornean kids, but the other part of the deal is that once they collect them, then we give them 21st century technology. So, well, I'll show you a little bit of that in a second. So I feel when I deal with my students, now this is my former PhD student, Densi Flenny. She is a Badayu from Western Borneo. She got her PhD at LSU. She's suffering. And that's good because I feel that you don't have an adventure unless you suffer. Here she's climbing a mountain. And we get them into camp, which is a pretty brutal. This particular camp, I remember very well, it rained constantly and we were just soaked, everything was soaked. But they get that kind of adventure, so they build memories. And then while we're doing that, they're collecting data. And this goes to one of the issues that has been discussed several times in this meeting, is that you don't have to know anything to start. I can take any kid to Borneo who likes to camp or is reasonably rugged, and they don't have to know anything before that. I teach them how to do simple things like these kids here. These guys I mean, these are Malaysians, but they're making specimens. Here's a guy recording birds. I just get them to do simple survey techniques, simple museum techniques. And then we take those specimens back to the lab, either with my collaborators, and I always have I have several professors at those universities in Malaysia that I work with. We either go to those universities or we come back to America and we do modern next generation DNA genomics on the samples. We figure out, in this case, there's some population genetics, try to figure out how these birds evolved, where they came from, that kind of thing. We do deep dish ecological analyses so that the kids, when they go to look for jobs, they know how to do the museum stuff, the traditional stuff, but they also can sell themselves as modern, technologically informed biologists. And the only other thing I would say is that I need to point out my collaborator in this, Allison Styring. She's at Evergreen College, a touchy-feely place in Olympia, Washington. She's the ecologist. She knows all about the stats. I'm a DNA guy, and so we have this wonderful teamwork that we put together to make this happen. That's my story.
Good morning. Thank you so much for just kind of toughing it out. I know we're right at the end, and I know that really for the people that's in this room, you know, time is at a premium. I'd like to thank Randy for this opportunity to really talk about something that's passionate to myself, as well as I think has become very valuable for the Louis Stokes Midwest Center. Thank you. Louis Stokes Midwest Center of Excellence. And that is the Louis Stokes Midwest Center of Excellence. So as Randy said, my name is Dr. Leroy Jones. I am one of the co-PIs and also the director for this particular center, which was funded by the NSF about 3 or 4 years ago. So how did this come about? When you look at the history of the Louis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation Program, its course has been around since the early 90s, and the Alliance itself has done a great job in terms of recruiting, also providing retention, graduation rates, and getting students to either matriculate into graduate school or into the STEM workforce. However, the problem is that the alliances often did a great job within their alliances, but the information did not disseminate out of the alliances. So they wanted to try to make a bigger impact. So back in 2011, and I just totally missed it. I didn't even see it. It was kind of nestled away in one of the broadening participation RFPs, and it talked about these Lewis Stokes pilot centers of excellence. And I just blew over it. I didn't pay attention to it. And one of my colleagues at IUPUI called me and said, Leroy, one of the things that you have to have a senior alliance. And at that time, Kim Nguyen, she was with the Indiana Alliance, and it wasn't a senior alliance. And she said, you also need to be working with the government lab. And we had been working with Argonne National Laboratory for over 20 years. So it was a perfect fit. We looked at it, we got together, and we kind of talked about it, and we decided to go after it. Now, initially, there were supposed to be several pilot centers to disseminate the best practices of the National Science Foundation LSM program. Well, when things kind of boiled down, it was only one funded, and that was the Lewis Stokes Midwest Center of Excellence. So we went from really a regional focus. Okay, we were kind of, trying to really look at the Midwest to a national focus. So we became essentially, in the national sense, dissemination agent for the LSM program. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Dr. Hicks' office. It's probably about a quarter of this room. But before the LSMCE, you would go into his office, and literally, there were boxes for over 20 years stacked up to the ceiling. He was pushed in a little corner, working out of the corner, so you needed somebody to kind of get in there, get the information, and get it out to the people. So originally, what we said that we were going to do was to work with 28 Midwestern non-LSM schools. And we were going to work with those schools, share with them the best practices, and see how essentially impact those institutions. So initially, starting out, it was really 3 entities involved. Chicago State University was the lead institution. IUPUI in Indianapolis, was one of our co-PIs, and then also Argonne National Laboratory. Dr. Suki Blanc of the Creative Research and Evaluation was our external evaluator. And then finally, Guardians of Honor came on a little bit later, and I will talk about them as I get further into the talk. So what was our objective? What were we trying to do with the LSMCE? The first thing that we wanted to do was really kind of take a leadership role to articulate, the national critical need for broadening minority participation and success in STEM undergraduate programs. And we had a 3-fold focus for doing that. So the first thing we said that we were going to do was to recruit 28 non-LSM partner institutions in 6 Midwestern states. So we essentially looked at all of the states that was bordering Illinois and targeted schools, in those states. What we were looking for was percentage of minorities as defined by the NSF. So of course it's African American, Latino, Hispanic, Native American, Pacific Islanders, and also Native Alaskan. So those were the 5 groups that we were looking at. So that was one piece of it. The other thing that we looked at was retention and graduation rates. So schools that were doing, pretty well, but just needed a little bit of a bump, to increase their numbers. The second thing that we really wanted to do, if you know about the LSM model, it's really a cohort, an alliance model. So we come together. I run the Illinois LSM program. We have 15 institutions. 1 is a government lab. 9 is 4-year institutions. The balance are 2-year institutions. We typically come together about 4 times a year, and we talk about effective strategies. Then we take those strategies, and go back and implement it into our various institutions. We want to do the same type of thing, build those partnerships and those relationships, with those non-LSM partners. And then the third thing was to really host a national conference to communicate best practice to faculty and also talk about exciting careers that students can get into. So we do that every year around October. So that was the first objective. The second objective was to develop this really intense information hub. And you can find that at the lsmce.org. And what you'll find there is just a lot of online resources. But the other piece of it that you can find there is really a lot of information about LSM. So before this time, it was kind of scattered. You can look at it at different places. Often the information wasn't consistent. PIs had changed. What they were doing had changed. The new LSMs that came on board was not there. So we served as that place, as that hub, so that you could find that type of information. So with that hub, if you take a look at it, it's really two strategies. The first one has a faculty focus, and for those faculty, we offer webinars. It's a lot of online resources there that they can tap into. We have several workshops that go on, throughout the year. But probably the most important thing is we help them to identify resources, but we also help them to understand how they can leverage what they have to go after these resources. So, for example, a lot of our institutions within the LSMCE that are non-partners, they've been able to secure grants that they hadn't been able to secure in the past simply because they were affiliated with the LSMCE. So in a sense, it gave them, some credibility that they were actually working in these programs to increase those numbers. And then let's see, the second strategy was really student focus. So we took on this mindset, what can we do virtually? Now, if you look at the typical LSAMP model, you have a cohort of school or an alliance of school. The money comes in to the lead institution. The lead institution then disperses money out to the partner institution so they can do programs. Well, in this case, the LSMCE or the NSF said, you're not giving money out to anybody. We want you to develop another model for disseminating the information, and that's why we went to really kind of trying to support both faculty and students virtually. So as you can see, one of the things that we really trying to do and we've been working on is really connecting students, through various platforms, one being Adobe Connect, and the most recent, which has worked very well for us, is using Zoom, just to make them aware of STEM career options, research explanation, as well as graduate school preparation. But the other thing that has been quite beneficial, and we saw a little bit of it today, is that the whole thing of facilitating peer-mentor relationships. So you'll find in a lot of our alliances, and a lot of our colleagues in the room can speak to this, is just the ability and the power of a peer mentoring another peer. So we were trying to set up those type of relationships virtually through our website, so that you can actually have an LSAMP student mentoring a non-LSAMP student. And that's, been pretty powerful for us. And then, of course, the other thing, and I've already talked to all four of those individuals and told them we will provide them with a platform at the next LSMCE meeting to actually talk about what they did, internationally. So if you come to our meeting in October, you will see those four individuals if their schedules permit. So our third thing was really to establish the what we call the Cyber LSMCE Hub, to disseminate information and create networks of support for non-LSAMP students. And once again, two strategies there. So of course, one of the things that has happened for those individuals, whether they are a non-LSAMP or a LSAMP institution, we disseminate information. And it really works two ways. We ask that program officers, as well as our LSAMP partners, give us information, and then we disseminate it out to mass, to the students, as well as to faculty. And that can be, announcements and registration for webinars, conference registrations, as well as news and event areas through our publication. The second strategy, which has been very powerful for us, is actually teaming up with a national lab. So I mentioned to you a little bit earlier that the Illinois LSAMP program has been a partner with Argonne National Laboratory for over 20 years. As a result of that, we have been able to send probably about over 24 faculty and about 140 students to national lab experiences throughout the United States and even over to the CERN with that partnership. So we wanted to bring that same benefit to the non-LSAMP partners and their students that our LSAMP students were experiencing. So real quickly, I was talking to you a little bit earlier that since we were the only funded center, we kind of took on a national flavor. I talked about Dr. Hicks' office, and one of the things that we did was we identified Guardians of Honor who are actually out of Virginia, and what they've been doing for us is actually digitizing the information that we receive, and then making that available to our partners as well as the LSAM community. We've done that in 3 phases. So you can see that, sorry about that, in March of 2013, we were awarded an initial supplement, and what they did was they essentially did a viewer application on a CD, which we distributed. So for example, let me see, Oklahoma, for example, here, I'll use your AMP. So if you go to that particular CD and you put in Oklahoma State University's LSAMP program, you can see every single document that Oklahoma has submitted to the NSF. And that's the case for every other alliances. So any publications, any best practices, you can find it, on that. So the second phase of it was we had it on a media disc, but now we actually want to gravitate it to our website. So Guardians of Honor spent some time really doing the second phase here, which was awarded in 2014, developing a digital library. And then we were just awarded last month the rest of the money so that we can actually start migrating that to the LSMC website. So you'll be able to go to the LSMC website, and if you want to just type in retention, then you will see everything that the LSAM partners are doing with retention. If you want to see recruitment, you'll be able to see recruitment. International opportunities, it will all pop up. Okay, and of course that's granted if you're feeding that information to the NSF. So what has been some of our successes when you look at it, and we always like to talk a little bit about that. The first thing, of course, is, we serve as that repository and disseminator for the LSAM best practices. That's something that we set out to do, and we're glad that we've been able to do that. Now, to date, if you recall, we said over 5 years that we would actually pick up 28 non-LSAM partners. To date, we've done 24. So we're in our 4th year. We have 1 more year to pick up the other 4. So we're pretty sure that we will be able to do that. When it comes to broadening participation, we really have increased visibility in terms of what's being done within the LSAMP program, as well as with other organizations. And then, of course, really just creating for those non-LSAMP partners opportunities for their students as well as their faculty so they can become more involved in these research programs. And then, of course, new opportunities for external funding. Some other things, we created the conference every year. And on the next slide, I will certainly put that plug out. And hopefully we could see you there, at our conference. But I think one of the things that we've really become is what we call a network of networks. So we see ourselves as trying to connect several entities on several levels. So the LSAMP, non-LSAMPs, we're trying to do government, private, as well as our NSF partners with the RAUs, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here working with Randy today. And then, of course, the National LSAMP Alliance participate in conferences, and we contribute to several webinar developments and have access to online resources. And one of the things that we like to boast of in our last report, we had about a little bit over 7,000 users of the website. So, we like to say that we're coming along pretty well. Some of the challenges, and I just want to talk about this real quick, Randy, and then I'll take my seat. It's just amazing, the similarities. Whether it's an LSAMP or a non-LSAMP, we're really in this all together. And some of the major things that we saw as we went out and we talked with these non-LSAMP institutions throughout the Midwest, the biggest thing was just inadequate K-12 preparation for too many URM students. So when they come in, they're just not prepared and they're just not aware, of the opportunities. Another thing is that we constantly pick up, when we're talking with these institutions as well as their students, that because of their personal situations, because of them not being traditional students, as William was talking about a little bit earlier, a lot of things just really prevents them from focusing on their subject matter, because for the most part, a lot of them have to have external jobs, have families and other things that distract from them actually being the very best student that they can be. A big thing that anytime we go, the president, the provost, the deans, the faculty members, say, where are the faculty of color? Where are they coming out? Can you put us in touch with them? And one of the things that we often speak about is our Bridge to the Doctor program. And they'll say, okay, so where are they at? Can we reach out to them? Can we start, to actually try to cultivate them? And one of the things that we are thinking about doing as we move to the next phase, God willing, if we can convince the NSF that we have done some good work, in the next phase, we really plan to have a stronger component there. We're actually working with the Bridge to the Doctorate students to have a module where schools can actually track the students as they're going through their respective programs. Another big problem is mentor buy-in. So it's fine to mentor. They understand, especially junior faculty member, the importance of mentoring. However, they got to get tenure. They got to be promoted. So oftentimes they're going to spend the time in the lab, getting the publications. They're looking for the high quality students so they can be able to do that. Since our students are underprepared, sometimes they're not willing to take that risk. And I'm just being quite frank with you. So really just trying to talk with the upper administrations to somehow try to incentivize young faculty, older faculty to actually work, with our students, and in particular URM students. And then of course, everybody in this room know that these projects are very labor intensive. Programs like the NSF, the NIH, of course, they cap our IDCs and what we can do. They expect institutional buy-in, and of course, they should expect institutional buy-in for sustainability purposes, but you really have to have dedicated faculty who have a passion for these students, like many of the people in this room, who will, go really beyond what they're supposed to do. Then, of course, the thing that we're dealing with right in the state of Illinois with Chicago State not having a budget for 10 years, grappling with that, just the dwindling state funds for public institutions. So trying to find the money to support these type of programs. So the last thing I just wanted to give a plug, save the date. All right, so our conference theme this year is Prisms of Possibilities, Focus on the Future. The conference will be in Chicago, October 28th through the 30th, 2016. If you want more information, please go to the website or see me, and I would love to talk with you about this. Thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate it, Andy.
One thing that we often encourage campuses to do is to disaggregate their data so you can look specifically, not just with graduation rates, but okay, who's participating in our high impact practices? Can we pull it apart by income level? Can we pull it apart by background? Can we pull it apart by first gen? And that's a first step to opening eyes of some folks. And then it helps some campuses that are similar in size to sort of say, okay, we may need to reallocate some of our funding then. If we see that this particular group of students are well underrepresented, I have another slide that talks about participation in high impact practices. And new majority students tend to participate in service learning at similar rates, if not higher rates. With international projects, they participate at a lower level. When you're looking at first year seminars, they participate at a high level because again, it's rated for everyone. So one of the first steps is disaggregating the broader data, and that helps open up things so that you can see, okay, where is it that we need to go? Another thing is that commitment from the president or the provost, and a commitment from deans as well. That's where we've seen the change, some change can occur. So I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but those are some things that we've done. We also have a document called Committing to Equity, and I can send you that link, and it's a series of questions that we've had dialogues on campuses to sort of say, okay, if we say we're really about this, what are we doing? And there have been a number of faculty learning committees that have been established or days on campus, and that's also helped sort of move things forward. But I was previously at IUPUI, and we had a number of the same challenges, and we were proud to get to that 50%, rate for 6 years, and we said, okay, now we need to go to the next level. So I hope that was.
I just wanted to add one other thing too. At Chicago State is a predominantly black institution, and have some of the same problems, that you have there. And I think what it's important to do, especially as we see a lot of states moving to performance-based metrics, is to remind them of the type of students that we serve. So in our case, I'm reminding them that that matrix is based on first-time, full-time freshmen. So at Chicago State, that's less than 10% of our population. So once again, desegregating the information, looking at, since we know that we have 90% of the students transferring in, looking at that 4, 5, and 6-year graduation rate, and it dramatically goes up. But just keeping that, in front of people, that we really do have a unique mission, and it's very important, that we're able to educate, minority students, so they can go out and do great things, in society.
Well, of course, this is way outside my view, but I will say something which I think is interesting. At LSU, so the flagship institution of Louisiana has the same graduation rates. So that's like if you went back to California, Berkeley and UCLA have a 50% graduation rate. There are different parts of the country that have different challenges.
So I would be remiss if I didn't publicly acknowledge Darlene and Deb Cole. Let's please give them a round of applause. And I'm going to use the chair's privilege to ask a question of Dr. Jones, but direct it to Deb, because I think that she and the other team members can maybe respond. And that is that you talked about in LSMCE a lot of resources, and I think it might be useful if, off the top of your head, Dr. Jones or Deb, if you can think of webinars and other materials that go along the same three themes, the goals of our workshop that might be available as that specifically speak to attributes, strengthening attributes of undergraduates, mentors, and so forth. And I'm sorry to catch you at a bad moment. Leroy, can you think of anything?
I could probably show you better than I can actually tell you. So Deb, would you speak to a few real quickly while I'm? Oh, she can.
Through the LSMCE website, it's lsmce.org. We have several different libraries on there. Number one, we have our webinars that we have recorded since our inception, which has started in 2012. All of them are out there and available on demand 24/7, as well as the fact that we will be putting out there all of our different symposiums and workshops that we have coming up, the presentations that are there. We will also be loading up the presentations from this particular meeting that we've had once we get them collated. In addition to that, NSF on a regular basis contacts me and gives me opportunities of emails, not necessarily webinars, but they are different opportunities such as internships and partnerships available, and funding as well. And I send those out via listserv to over 1,200 people at this time. It goes out about every week, about every other week during summers and on holidays. But other than that, those are available and widely distributed. So if you'd like to be on that list or like to get that email, let me know, and I'll be happy to add you to that list. Dr. Jones, what are you wanting to show?
So I'm trying to show some of the online things that we offer. So
I think we're going to have to get out of that PowerPoint.
One of the other things that we have on our website that will become more visible and more user-friendly is we have partnered with the Guardians of Honor. And what they have done is they have collated the last 25 years of the Lewis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation programs, all the best practices, all of the different impact reports and things of that nature, and they have them out there, and it's all in a database, and it's searchable, and it is accessible via our website. But the interface itself needs a little bit of work, and we're working on that, but I can give everybody a link to that as well.
Well, while Leroy's pulling that up, are there any other questions for our panelists?
Was not a question, but it's not a question, but a comment, if you will, in respect to peer mentoring. Another element of the dosing program with the partnership between Lyra and Southern University is we have it called Project MISE. It's a professional development program for teachers. And what it is a program it's called Project Modeling Inquiry-Based Science Education. And I started out as a participant at first, for the first maybe week or so. But just like any new startup, they're gonna need some tech guy, some engineering guy, some physics guy to help them out constructing the snacks and whatnot. So after about 2 weeks in, and they realized that yes, I am a physics guy, I became part of their faculty, if you will. And I found myself mentoring, the other faculty, staff there because, they had some concerns about the STEM majors as well. They're education majors, but they're not as prepared in their respective disciplines. So at times, with the Project MISE program, it gives them that opportunity to explore more venues of articulating the information to their students. So I found myself, kind of encouraging them also. Yes, you're an education major and whatnot, but a STEM minor may not be such a bad idea. A STEM double major may not be such a bad idea. Because in some of those disciplines, all you really need is maybe 2 or 3 more classes and you will get a minor, as well as that background information that you're gonna need when you go into, say, your elementary math classes. Because a lot of times it's not so much as you don't know the information, you don't know the basics well enough to articulate it. I can show you how to do fractions, but I'm not really teaching you fractions because I'm just showing you how to do it. And the only way you can learn math is when you know it, you don't have to do it. So I found myself mentoring in that respect as well, and also as a docent. And that's another strength that non-traditional students can bring to the organizations, because unwarranted at times, they find themselves being that mentor, for themselves, as for their peers, as well as the audience that the program is targeting.